It's almost about that time. Right about now. Right about now.
All right. So Katie Hill, welcome to Right About Now.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
It's so great to have you. And again, thank you for writing this book. It's such a brave book, such an interesting book. I'm curious why you decided to write it.
Sure. Well, many people have seen my resignation speech. It kind of went viral when I decided to step down. I was, a high-profile freshman. I had turned a Republican seat blue, had won by 9 points, was elected to leadership in the House, and things were looking like I was on a very upward trajectory in congressional leadership, probably for a long career. And then in October of last year, my ex-husband, who had threatened to ruin me when I'd tried to leave before, followed through on his, and in conjunction with right-wing media and political operatives in the district, released nude photos of me, some of which I didn't even know were taken, and some that showed that I had a relationship with a woman who had worked on my campaign. And so it was a complicated situation, and ultimately at that moment I decided that it was best for me to step down. It was a really tough decision, but in my resignation speech I said that I might be stepping down now, and I'm not going to be in the halls of Congress anymore, but I'm not done with the fight, and I'm going to figure out another way to keep fighting for the things that matter, things that I was elected on in the first place. And so I took a little bit of time, had to regroup, and I had to kind of figure out what that meant for me. So writing the book was, people approached me pretty much right away saying, "You've got a story to tell." But I knew I didn't want it to be just a, autobiography. I didn't want it to be just a memoir. I felt like I needed to kind of outline my plans and what I thought was, were the major barriers that we faced, and how we were going to really try and tackle these systems of misogyny and inequality that prevent women from achieving their full potential and from achieving equality across the board. So, and I cared about so many issues, right? I didn't, run as a congressional representative just to fight for women's issues, but because of the double standard, because of the number of stories that I heard about victims of, revenge porn or cyber exploitation, because of my own experience, I decided my next chapter needed to focus on that. So the book was kind of my way of processing it all and sort of outlining and putting into words the direction that I want to take with my advocacy efforts, and what I think needs to be sort of the battle plan for all of us to come together and fight for the opportunities that are going to make it possible for us to achieve equality.
So that's a lot to unpack there. And it really, yes, the book, I think the New York Times described it as like part memoir, part manifesto. And I think that was a good way to summarize it. I want to get into the memoir portion of your life first, and then I do want to get into some of the ideas in the book because they're so important now, especially with the election coming up. But take me a little bit back to, the young Katie, where you grew up. You grew up in kind of like a red area, right? I'm down here in Los Angeles. I think you grew up in the Simi Valley area, which is north of LA. Tell me a little bit.
So I grew up, So my district, the district I represented was the 25th Congressional District, which included Simi Valley, Santa Clarita, and the Antelope Valley. Okay. I grew up in the Antelope Valley and Santa Clarita, but the entire time that I was growing up and that I lived in the district, which was really my whole life, it was represented by a Republican. And so even when Trump had won and it became clear that the first thing we needed to do was flip the House in order to kind of minimize the damage that he could do during his presidency, it didn't even occur to me that my district could be in play until I found out, that Hillary Clinton had won in the district, and that was a total surprise to me. So, but yeah, it's a district full of cops and firefighters and and
your father is a cop, right? Your dad's a cop. Your mom's a emergency nurse. So good public servants. You grew up in that kind of environment.
Yeah. And so I and my intention was never to go into politics. I was, I was public servant in a different way. I was running a large nonprofit organization working to end homelessness. And I thought that that was my calling. That was what I was going to do for the rest of my career, until Donald Trump became president. And I felt like I needed to do more. And even then I was, I was planning on continuing my career, but also trying to work on a campaign or, contribute what I could. And then finally it just, enough people said you should run. And I felt like I didn't see a candidate that could beat the incumbent that I wanted to support. And I said, if Donald Trump can win as president, then all bets are off for who a normal politician is and who could pull something like this off, and decided I'd
So keep in mind,
give it a shot.
you're 20, right? So you were 29 at this time, right? I mean, that was when you first decided. So that's like, I mean, I'm like, I hate you. That's incredible. Like that you would be that, that you could be that ambitious and focused at that young an age. And, a lot of it seems to be that you kind of grew up in this upbringing. You talk a lot about your grandfather in your book about kind of, he always instilled in you this sort of like warrior idea. You used to watch Xena, the warrior princess, which is funny. It made me laugh because I remember back early in my career taking Xena, the warrior princess, to Magic Mountain, which is up near you, to go on roller coasters.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. It was one of my first assignments. I got to ride around
cool.
on a roller coaster with Lucy Lawless. I almost threw up on her. It's a whole
I'm jealous.
It's a holy yeah. Well, it was pretty awful because I got really nauseated on the roller coaster ride, and I'm like sitting next to Xena. I'm like about to throw up all over.
Well,
She was lovely. But anyway, I digress. But anyway, tell me about that. So you, like, from a time you were young, you were just like, you never had this attitude like women have to take a second seat to, guys. Like it was pretty strong part of your life.
Yeah. I mean, that was something that I was totally raised with from, my dad, my mom, and especially my grandpa, who, I don't know exactly where it came from. I was the oldest of my siblings, and I think that it was just something that was really instilled in me that it doesn't matter that you're a girl, you can do whatever you want. And my grandfather, he was a political science professor at LA. He was one of his area of focus was on Greek mythology and on Greek political theory, and so he told all sorts of tales about the Greek gods and goddesses, and so the warrior women were ones that really attracted me, and I kind of was taught and decided to adopt those sort of traits and
Right.
mentality.
And I mean, early on, did you get the sense that we lived in a misogynistic society? Like, when did you first get inklings that was true? Because sometimes, when you're a young woman growing up and you have so much support, there can be like a rude awakening, like, oh, this is the actual reality of the world.
Yeah. I talk about this a bit in the book, but when my first kind of political consciousness was around the 1992 presidential election with Bill Clinton, and I remember about Hillary Clinton and asking, why she wasn't the one who was running. Why was it her husband and not her? Because I really liked her, and people didn't have a good answer. My mom said, well, there's never been a woman president, and I was like, well, why? And nobody could really answer why. And then, I remember other things in elementary school where I was called bossy all the time, but boys weren't. Boys were, reprimanded just hardly at all if they did something, they did something bad, if they yelled, if they, got in trouble in some way. But girls, if you did anything at all, it was considered a serious offense. And by the time I got to junior high, I started thinking that the dress code for girls was pretty much a bunch of crap, that, we were basically being blamed for boys' bad behavior because, they can't handle it if we wear the spaghetti strap rule. Like that one just absolutely killed me.
You couldn't wear spaghetti straps?
No. And then by the time that I entered high school, I had experiences of sexual assault, and And it kind of became clear that, this reality, or this, idea that women and men are equal, even though we might be able to get the same careers, even though we might have the same opportunities to get into college, and, we can be equal in some ways, there's something going on here that is fundamentally flawed. And I couldn't really put my finger on it for a long time, but you kept feeling that, you kept kind of having that in the back of your head. Like so many women, I think we instinctively know, right? I mean, when I was a young kid, my family had me go to a women's self-defense class where I had to, I couldn't have been more than 8 years old. And the fact that we have to teach our daughters that is just, it's horrifying.
So you grew up in a red district or a red area, traditionally red. For those who don't know, Simi Valley is like home to the Ronald Reagan Library. It's kind of known for being fairly red, and it kind of surrounded but there's like red below us and red above us, but Los Angeles is like dark blue. But were the other kids you grew up with and the parents, was it pretty conservative? Like, were you kind of immediately, did you stand out for your beliefs,
Yeah, I was attracted to friends that had similar beliefs, but
right.
I remember in 7th grade, it must have been, could have been 8th grade, the 2000 election. I followed politics because my family did, and because my grandpa was very into it. And so we did a mock election, and I remember talking to people about it, and I just couldn't believe, like, all these people were for George Bush, and I'm like, why? And they're like, well, my parents are. And I'm like, but all these things, and I'd give my whole,
right.
list of arguments. And it was shocking to me. And then they gave the results, they gave the school results. And, obviously nationwide, it was an extremely close election, but in our school, it was like 75% George Bush. And I convinced a couple people to vote for, to vote for Gore, or a few people who wouldn't vote for Gore at least voted for Ralph Nader. And I'm like, fine. But I just was shocked at how many like that. And then it continued kind of in that vein of, I got into high school, and I really had objections to the Iraq War. And there were like 5 of us who, protested it, and we got in trouble. We did a walkout, and we were very much the minority. I was part of the what was it, the Gay Straight Alliance. There were maybe 4 of us in that too. And in high school, I started to really come to terms with the fact that I was bi. And at the same time, we were a really anti-LGBT community, and teachers that came out to a few of us students that were also queer were not out of the closet, because a teacher couldn't really be out of the closet there as gay, especially a male teacher. And we and then what year would it have been? Oh yeah, 2008. So leading up to Prop 8, and many people remember Prop 8, which was the California ban on same-sex marriage. Leading up to that, the person who was actually Steve Knight, who was my predecessor, the person I beat, his dad was the champion of the state legislative effort to ban gay marriage in California. And it was overturned in the state Supreme Court, which led to Prop 8 being actually put onto the ballot. And Prop 8 won by 2/3 a 2/3 margin in our district. So, you're considering coming out as bi or as gay or whatever. And that most of the people in our community are homophobic and not accepting. So that's one of the reasons it was really important to me to run openly, and to show, especially other kids out here, that you can, and that you should be able to be yourself. And even if I didn't win, I wanted to be able to own that.
Right. So around this time, so when you were a teenager, you met your ex-husband. I guess you went to school with him, or you just knew him. And
I met him. Yeah, I met him right after high school.
You met him right after high school. And so you were at this point, and tell me if I'm getting too personal, but you were openly bisexual at this point. You're openly bisexual publicly with your husband, right? Or when did that?
I didn't come out to him. I didn't come out to him until I was 18.
Okay. But so he was aware of it.
Yeah, a little later.
Yeah.
But- so we met when I was 16, almost 17, and he was 21. And so it was like a year and a half later probably that I came out to him.
And you describe that relationship, the book, as being abusive, and sort of living almost two lives. Like you had this public life, but then you'd come home, where all these great things were happening for you, and then you would come home and would be like really unpleasant and scary at times, because your ex-husband was kind of unpredictable with his mood swings and stuff. But you've known him like almost your whole life, or known him a long time. Can you talk about that? Like what were the problems, and what were the challenges that time for you?
So, and this is something that I really wanted to kind of make sure was clear in the book for especially young women who might be reading it, who I hope can kind of see warning signs earlier than I did. So, I was coming out of 2 sexual assaults that I was pretty traumatized by. And I ended up kind of gravitating towards this guy who was older and who I felt treated me well, and, bought me flowers and cards, and I felt like treated me with respect. But I didn't register at the time, especially because I think as a teenager, you think that you're much older than you are. So it didn't register really at the time that, despite people warning me that, it's problematic that somebody who was that much older than you wanted to be with somebody who was that young. And so I ignored that. I said, I'm going to do what I want. I already graduated high school. You can't stop me, kind of thing. I was moving off into the dorms. And so I just, ignored my parents and said, well, if you don't like it, then I'm just not really going to talk to you. And so in the beginning, it felt like felt like stuff that, you don't know what a relationship is or what a healthy relationship should look like. Right. So when he said stuff like, oh, you don't really need to dress that nice when we go out, because it's just for me. And I like the way that you look, you're without makeup or without, dressing up. And then if you did try and like wear something nice, then he'd be like, what, are you trying to attract other guys? And he'd want to know where I was at all times. If I started, if I wanted to talk to people or hang out with friends, he would want to be there. And then it moved more and more into like, well, why would you want to spend any time with anyone but me? Like, we're so in love with each other, and things like this that kind of became more and more normalized, just because you don't have something else. And it's that isolation, those pieces that sort of, I think, gradually kind of normalize it, and especially for young women, young girls, you just don't figure it out until, well, you're in it. Yeah. Until it's too late.
And you're so young. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I can't say that like everything was all bad all the time, right? Like there were good times, but there was, the entire time, I would say, especially in retrospect, there were a lot of real red flags. And like, especially when he would get upset, it was really unpredictable behavior, and things that I should have noticed, or can't say should have, but I wished I'd noticed and wish I'd told people about, right? Because I was embarrassed. I didn't ever want to tell like my mom or my sister or my friends. And so at a certain point, you just are used to it. This is just normal for you. You don't really think about it as being abusive or toxic or anything like that. But then as I got older, and especially once I decided to run for Congress, and once it got more and more likely that I was going to win, I think he felt his power being taken away and his control over me being taken away. And that's when things really started to escalate. And I talk about like the violence involved with that, and the coercive control. And
the threat.
So it hit a point that I wanted to, I felt like I needed to leave, even though it was in the middle of the campaign. I felt like I needed to leave. And that was when he said, if you leave, I will ruin you. But 6 months into office, I knew, staying in Washington, and this was the first time I'd lived separately from him.
I didn't know that. Okay.
And it was, I realized how happy I was away from him, and how much of a relief it was, and how different I was, and how much more capable I was as a person than I even thought I was. And I knew I needed to get out, but so I did. I finally did in June, and then by October he had, released these images.
And at the time, you know, and you write about this in the book, you were in a consensual relationship with one of your staff members, a female member of your staff. Looking back, it kind of makes sense, you know, when you hear your story, like why you would be calling out for that kind of a relationship, you know.
Yeah.
But do you look back, do you have regrets about that now? Because I know that you know, you're
Oh,
very
sure.
sensitive to like the inequity in that kind of relationship and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And, absolutely. I mean, it's the biggest mistake that, I guess led to all of this, right?
Mm.
Is that, um, I didn't at the time realize that I was, potentially, um, putting her in a situation of a power dynamic, because it was consensual, and it didn't feel like something I was, you know, that I was trying to get her to do, or holding a job over her head or anything like that. It didn't even occur to me, especially because we all felt like peers. It was so early on in the campaign. It felt like such a grassroots thing. It felt like something that was, we were working towards the impossible together. And I happened to be the face of it, but I didn't feel like I was,
Right. The main. Yeah.
yeah. And so I didn't really kind of come to terms with it as this power imbalance until much later, and or this potential power imbalance until much later, and honestly even until you know as so this we started seeing each other before Me Too, before Harvey Weinstein and everything like that. And when it did, that was sort of when I started thinking about it. I was like, well, at least perception wise, it's bad enough for people to think that as a married woman I'm having a relationship with another woman, but and to add this piece of her working for me. And so I in that relationship too, and it was, yeah, it's just
You said
it
you
was
ended
just
that relationship too. Yeah. Did you say you
Mhm.
ended? I'm sorry, you broke up. Okay. All right. Well, I don't want to dwell on this too much because I want to get into the heart of your book and the manifesto part. But tell me a little bit about, when these pictures came out. I was thinking about you last night because I rarely engage in social media. I try to avoid it. And I got trolled.
Right.
I printed a story on Entrepreneur because I write for Entrepreneur Magazine, and somebody started trolling me about it they were kind of like accusing me of appropriating a Maya Angelou quote and saying it was somebody else's. And it was a ridiculous argument that they were making, but they were basically implying that I was like racist and so I just set me off. Right. And I couldn't sleep all night. I was so upset. I had engaged. And then I was thinking, think of what Katie went through. Like, Jesus Christ. Like, like I'm
Yeah.
not going to even think, like, I'm not going to feel bad at all about this. Like, I just can't imagine what you went through when those pictures came out and kind of how you held yourself together. I know in the beginning it was very hard to pull yourself together, right? Like you talk about suicide.
Yeah.
But how
Yeah.
did you
And
go ahead?
go ahead.
No, I just like, how did you do
Well,
it? And
yeah, I mean, it was the mental toll that it took, and the barrage you kept getting, and the toll that it was taking on people you cared about too, your family, your staff, and the feeling that it was never going to end. That that in that moment, like, you recognize that we kind of, in our cognitive brains, realize that a political scandal doesn't last forever, but it didn't feel like something that was ever going to stop if I didn't leave. It was, I think that's a big part of what contributed to Step Down, because it just didn't, I didn't feel like there was any other way to stop it. And it was so, it had a real, like, it took a violent toll on you. It took it is a form of assault. It's a form of abuse. It's a continuation of the abuse that I endured during my marriage. And even though it happens digitally, it still has the same impacts. And I think in terms of getting through it, I had to rely the most on the people that I loved. And it was, my mom was the one who told me, who said, you don't have to keep going through this. And you've done enough. And that kind of gave me the permission, as it were, to feel like, okay, I can step down and try to approach this a different way.
I mean, a lot of people didn't want you to. A lot of your closest peers, a lot of your friends, obviously some family members. I mean, you have a conversation that you talk about with Nancy Pelosi, with Speaker Pelosi, where she's like, oh, Katie, you know, I feel so like, cause she was a mentor to you. And I think you got the sense that she didn't even necessarily want you to step down. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, she said it. She said it. And I guess you hear that and you kind of know that they you know, they mean it, right? But you're also like, what is that going to look like? What kind of, you know, the Speaker of the House is working towards impeaching the president, and
Mm.
like, how am I supposed to, you know, why do I want to put her or any of my other colleagues in a position of having to defend me in this crazy time as it is? So it just felt like I was too much of a burden. And I wonder too if that's a difference between men and women. That one of the reasons that we don't see men, you know, in a similar situation decide to step down is because they don't feel that kind of responsibility or sense of guilt, I guess, that we might. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, it drives me, listen, I'm going to true confession here. I'm a bleeding heart liberal. So you're on the, you're talking to a friendly person here. And I know that, you know, I even looked at your tweet like today about, you know, we have a, you know, a sexual predator in the White House. I think I'm sorry to paraphrase it, but you're basically, you know,
yeah.
like, you know, the double standard is so unbelievable in this
Mm-hmm.
situation. And so many people didn't want you to step down because you think of like Trump and all these people who have done worse than you didn't really do
Yeah.
anything. You just, pictures were revealed that were embarrassing, you know, like,
Yeah.
you know, so I don't know how you can handle that. I don't know how you can does writing help you exercise those frustrations and demons and talking about it? I mean, how do you?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, definitely the writing. I go to a lot of therapy. I recommend it for everybody, regardless of what you've been through.
Me too. My wife's a
um,
therapist. I'm there with you.
oh yeah, well there you go.
Yeah.
Um, but you know, I think that for I guess where I struggle is, and there are two different, you know, I guess schools of thought on this, is, you know, did I do something wrong? And I think, you know, where is that line? And this is where I talk about the gray area. Where's that line of what kind of accountability we want people to take for when they made a mistake, or when they overstepped a boundary, or when they did something that they shouldn't have done. And in my case, it was crossing the boundary of having a relationship with somebody who worked for me. But I don't, you know, I felt like then I, you know, been very vocal against Kavanaugh. I'd been very vocal. I'd even been vocal against Al Franken, and said that, you know, we need to, in this moment of Me Too, we need to be holding people to the standards that we want from our elected officials. I guess where I fell short is, you know, I really felt like that was not that didn't apply to me, because I didn't feel, you know, I felt like I was with my peers. I felt, you know what I mean? Like, I think it was, but so that's what I recognize is like, I did screw up, and knowing that I screwed up and asking for it, the whole thing not to apply to me, felt hypocritical, and I didn't want, you know, I didn't know what to do with that. So
Well, you have a
I sometimes
conscience
say, I'm
about it,
like,
which,
I'm not.
yeah, seems like you're not. I think a lot of times guys are able to compartmentalize this stuff, and some women are too. But it seemed like for you, it was more difficult to be like, that's one part
Yeah.
of my life, and this is my political life, and the two shall not
Yeah.
meet in my mind.
Right.
So,
Right.
so you,
Yeah.
yeah. So you did resign, and, you know, I think a lot of us were very sad about that. But, you know, now that you've explained why, I think it makes more sense. I mean, you just felt like it was just the pictures were going to keep coming out. They were just going to not stop until they kind of beat you
Yep.
down, right? And it was too much to bear.
Yep.
So talk about what happened next. I mean, I know there was a period of, you know, lots of intensive therapy. When did you start kind of getting back into the swing of things in your life and starting realizing you had more of a purpose than just, you know, you had to, obviously it took.
Well, I knew, yeah. Well, I knew even when I gave my resignation that the way for me to survive this was by finding another purpose, that I wasn't going to be able to if I didn't kind of immediately start to channel my energy. And so I'd begun starting to think about the formation of my pack called Her Time, and I'd started to, you know, even kind of come up with the ideas of a book, and I'd done a little bit of writing around it. But then and this is just a couple of months after everything happened, in January of this year, my 20-year-old, my mom went in for emergency brain surgery, so I had to fly, I flew back to California.
Wow.
And my 20-year-old brother, literally 2 days after her brain surgery, died from an overdose. And
I'm so sorry.
I was the one who found him and did CPR. And, he and I were incredibly close, like closer than, he was in a lot of ways more than a brother to me. And so that just, through everything, right? Like that's even a trauma that I would say that I have not, come close to fully addressing, but that part of, one of the last conversations that he had with me was basically saying he was proud of me for doing this book, and that, he felt like it was really important. And today, in fact, I end the book talking about, something we heard from, something I heard from a girl that he'd been seeing, and how he made her feel safe, and how just rare that is, and how that's, it's boys and young men that are going to be able to kind of change the way that women feel. And so I'm seeing her today. Like, we're going to his grave today. And so anyway, I decided after he died, like, I do need to continue with the book. And so in March, it put it on hold, but by March, I decided to just dive really back in. And I wanted to get the book published in time for the 100th anniversary of suffrage.
Mm-hmm.
So the deadline, like, it just had to be really close. So
yeah. Was it hard? Did you write this book yourself? Like, did you have some ghostwriting help?
I did. Yeah. I had someone who I've worked incredibly closely with during the campaign, all the way since the beginning of the campaign. She was like my senior advisor. She, did like ton of my comm stuff. Like, she's just been, my one of my top people forever. And so she helped me with it. So, like, I would raw chapters, she would kind of edit, we'd go back and forth. She'd help me, like, put things together in a more cohesive way. And then I'd send it off to the book editor, and the book editor didn't have to do, too much. So
that's good.
Yeah. So she deserves a big, credit for it. But
so you've got this, it's a great book, and it's a really good read. And it's not like, you don't like tell it, like, you tell it in an interesting way. You kind of go back and forth between your story and then kind of what you believe, and then you go back to your story. And so I like the way it unfolds. It's well done.
Thank you.
So you've got this pack, which so people understand, and I didn't understand this until I read your book. So you had this war chest that you accumulate when you're a candidate, that kind of, I guess, goes into some special account, and there's some rules around how you can use it, but you are allowed to use it for a political action committee, which you have one called Her Time. Is that what it's called?
Yep.
Yeah.
So you, basically, when you resign, or if you lose for reelection or whatever, then you have whatever you've got left over in that account. And since I was in a competitive race and already for it, I had a lot. I had about $1 million. You can either leave it there and just kind of give it out randomly to other members, or just leave it in case you run for something in the future. Or you can convert it into a PAC. And so that's what I did. And the PAC, the purpose of it is really to help women, especially young and women of color, get into these positions of power. And so we're doing that in, a few different ways. One of them is we're providing direct monetary support to women, especially early on when they need the help most, to get credibility and to get kind of that initial boost that is so hard to kind of cross the threshold on. And the second way is that we're doing research on how can we mobilize young women as a voting bloc, and how can we rely on them to help elect women, not just in, every 4 years for a presidential election, but every single election. And then the last thing is advocating for these legislative issues that, we talk about, that are really laid out in the book, that can lead us to equality.
Right. And you're backing certain candidates. You said many women of color across the country. Are there any that are running this election that you want to call out, that in case some of my readers are in those districts?
Yeah. So we've got several really great ones in Texas. I don't know where you're.
They're everywhere. I mean, they're all over.
Okay.
I'm in LA, but they're, it's national.
Yeah. Well, So two in Texas to really watch and who could use the support are Gina Ortiz-Jones. She's awesome. She came really close to beating Will Hurd last time, but now it's an open seat, and I think she can absolutely do it. And she's just incredible. She's fierce. She's former military. She's a lesbian. She's just, incredible. And then the other is Candice Valenzuela, and I'm really proud of our involvement in Candice Valenzuela's race because we backed her well before any of the other major groups, and so we did help her with that kind of initial boost and credibility to get the support after, because she was in a tough primary against a self-funding woman, and there are a lot of women's organizations that won't support somebody if they're running against another. They won't support one woman if they're running against another woman. And so I have the flexibility to say I think this is the right person for the district, or I think that this person aligns better with our values, or that this person is a better, is just somebody who's going to push us further. And so basically we got in with Candice, and she won. She got into a runoff, won her runoff for the primary, and is now moving into the general, and she's got a great shot too. Then here in Los Angeles, we're starting Holly Mitchell, which isn't for a congressional race, but it's for the county board of supervisors, because if she wins, it would make LA County Board of Supervisors all women, and that would that's an incredibly powerful body, and I think it would give us a great opportunity to see what potential is if we do have a all women run
right.
body.
Yeah,
so,
that'd be nice to see.
And she's just great too. So
you have such you have such an interesting perspective on all this, because you understand how people from red states and red districts think. A lot of us don't. Like, I'm born and raised in New York. I live in Los Angeles. I get it. I go out of my bubble, but I don't, I didn't grow up that way necessarily. And I find it a little bit hard to understand what's going on the other side. I think more and more, especially, we're just coming off the Republican convention, and it's unbelievable. The contrast to me between that convention and the Democratic convention, and like the lies and the, you just can't, the sort of cult-like nature of it. Do you have concerns, knowing kind of what about the way people in red states think and Republicans think, that there is a chance that Donald Trump, could win again? I mean, I know he's so down in the polls, and but I don't want to get complacent, because we all know we have to go and vote, but but do you feel like, even in your district, like, I don't know how much you're hanging out in 25th district these days, but do you feel like, wow, they're coming around again to him? Like,
I feel like in California suburban districts, he's not going to do well.
Right.
But I don't know if that's going to carry forward into other, other California, in suburban areas that are outside of California. I know a number of my former colleagues who are in places like Michigan and Minnesota say that they are worried. And I think that, we're, even in our suburbs, we're much more used to diversity. The fear mongering isn't going to work quite as well with us. My district, though, we have such a heavy presence of law enforcement, and I think that there's a real concern that I have a real concern that there's going to be a backlash, because if the message is effective from the right, saying that Biden is a defund police kind of candidate, then that's that there's a lot of a feeling of kind of not supporting the police already. And that's, it's just a huge part of the culture here. So, there's also, it's going to be harder to vote. It's going to be harder for people of color to vote. It's going to be harder just in general. And even though we're the ones who are pushing for mail-in ballots don't usually work to helping Democrats in a big way. And, we're not doing door knocking. We're not and doing the field work that we've been able to succeed with before, but because,
because of
safety
COVID?
with the coronavirus.
Yeah.
But Republicans don't care. They knocked over the last 3 months, they knocked over 5 million doors. And so there's this kind of unfair, it's not, I don't want to say unfair, but this advantage that they've got in terms of, they're willing to do these things that we, because, we've got these other concerns, or we want to show that we're as committed to safety as possible, that we're not doing. I hope that we can kind of change our mentality around it a little bit. Like if we're going to grocery stores and people are going out and interacting and, doing all these things, I feel like there's at least a case that to be made that people wear masks as they go knock on doors. And if someone doesn't want to open the door for a stranger, they don't need to, but you can at least leave literature. You can talk through ring doorbells. It's just that door-to-door communication, like is
Yeah, so
sometimes
important.
it is the most effective way to get people out to vote, especially low turnout, marginalized communities. And I'm very seriously concerned about that. So,
Oh, you're making me nervous. I mean, it's good. Yeah.
It means that we all need to work. And if we're not going out and knocking on doors, then, and people are home quarantined and, got time for all these Zooms, then that means that we should be making phone calls in these swing districts, and we should be texting, and everyone's up for different ways that they can sign up to volunteer, because it's going to take everything we've got. And I also think we need to plan to win by a landslide, because if it's close, then Trump isn't going to accept it. I think that, he and his supporters are going to say that the election was rigged, and God knows what kind of fight that's going to take. So
Yeah.
I want us to win big.
Me too. Just a few more questions. I'll let you go. You mentioned defunding the police, and that is, for me, that sort of drives me crazy. And I'd be curious to know your perspective because of the fact that your father is a police officer, and that you live in a district where there's a lot of police officers. I'm right in the heart of where a lot of the protests happen. I'm in the Hollywood area of California. It's like sort of it all started here for some reason. And so I was, in March and did all that stuff. The defund the police, I know that doesn't mean that you want to take money away from the police. I understand that
Right.
is more about reforming the police and allocating money in different ways. But do you think that's just a really crazy way that we've named it that, because everybody can now jump on this terminology, and Republicans are very good at like words and like, language. Yeah. And I feel like why are we calling it defund the police? Like, why did we set ourselves up for that? Does that drive you crazy?
Yeah. And it's tough, because I understand that it's Black activists who came up with the term, and they have a really strong intention for why they did, and they feel like there's a moment, and there's this sort of radical notion that needs to be pushed. So it's, to me, it's not really, I'm not the one to say if that's invalid. I also, however, can't, that's not the language that I'm going to use.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the approach that I want to take.
What do you say?
I do want to say.
What do you say?
Yeah, reform and reallocate resources, but that's even a hard conversation. I mean, trust me, I've gotten into so many of these conversations with my dad. That's a hard one. You can get them there, especially when you talk to him about like, not wanting to do, how much time they have to spend on calls for people who are homeless or for people who are mentally ill. And the thing is, and I definitely have a perspective that's different from a lot of my more progressive peers, because I've heard a lot of people say, well, traffic stops, why would we want traffic stops to be run by police? And I know that traffic stops are one of the most dangerous things that because you've got people who are that's how you find people with warrants, and and they're often dangerous, they're often carrying a weapon, and so it's going to take more than just saying, all right, taking 25 officers off the streets and we're turning them into mental health professionals. It's going to take something that's far more individualized by community, and it's hard when it's so factioned right now. And I recognize I'm white. I am a cop's daughter. I have not been through the terrible experiences that Black people have, but so I hope that we are able to kind of further the conversation in a way that recognizes that there are two sides to this, and more than two sides. We can't give in to the Trump messaging at all. Just to if the idea of defunding the police makes you uncomfortable, if you know law enforcement officers, or you do believe in like a law and order, or you think that police add safety to your community, we don't want to give them that Trump is the only option and Trump's kind of ideas are the only option. There needs to be some sort of alternative that is that recognizes the real flaws that exist in the system and the reforms that do need to take place, but that is also a little bit more, you know, cognizant of people's fears, and that sucks. That's not a thing that I think many people want to hear.
Right.
But
that's the reality. All right. Last question. So, your book is really aimed at, obviously people who are voting women, but also younger women who are thinking about getting into politics and thinking about taking the same road that you took. And, looking at it's complicated because looking at your experience, it might scare some women away because it's like, look at what Katie had to endure. Like, Jesus Christ, do I really want to go through that? And yet you think it's all worth it. And so I would love you to sort of explain to somebody who might be an aspiring politician or somebody wanting to get active in politics who's a woman, why it's still worth it and like why you wouldn't change anything even though, things happened for you the way they did.
Yeah, I've come to giving the advice of what happened to me is basically the worst case scenario. So
Right.
Think about it as if you can kind of picture, all right, if I'm considering entering this, and this is the possibility, this is the absolute kind of devastation that could happen. How can I be ready for that? How can I kind of mentally prepare myself? How can I prepare my family for it? And how can I get out ahead of it? And can you kind of steel yourself to say, even if this happens, even if someone weaponizes photos that I had given them consensually, but that I'd never wanted shared, like, how can you own that confidently and say this is something that is a normal behavior for especially for young people, but for so many people in the age of cell phones and the internet and everything like that. And I'm not gonna let that just be used to try and destroy me. And I think that my example, what happened with me, is maybe galvanized people a little bit more around that perspective. You heard, liberal, especially older liberals, at first with me saying stuff like, well, you shouldn't have let you put yourself in that position. You shouldn't have let those pictures be taken. Nancy Pelosi even said, and I called her office after this and said, and she kind of changed her wording afterwards of like, the errors in judgment of specifically relating to the pictures. And I'm like, no, you can say errors in judgment in terms of a relationship I had, but not around the pictures, because I didn't know some of those were taken. And even if I did, they were never meant for public consumption. And so I think that, the next generation, millennials younger, they're a lot more sex positive. And I think that they're, that they're ready to kind of take that on. And so I'm very hopeful about that. And to also say that, you're already, if you're a woman and you're living in this life and in this society, you are already a warrior. You are already getting hurt. You're getting damaged in some way, whether it's if you become one of the 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 women who's going to be sexually assaulted during her lifetime, or if you talk about all of the lost wages that you are going to miss out on because of income inequality, or the lack of access to equal health care. All of these things are already impacting you in a fundamentally detrimental way. So, be willing to put yourself out there. We need you. We need you to be warriors that are willing to get hurt. And we're there for you. We're gonna come around for you. And I truly do hope that my example is one that kind of set, a change in direction for other people can handle it in the future.
Well, I think you're a warrior, and I wish you were still in Congress, but I understand why you had to go. And I'm excited about the next chapter in your life. So Katie Hill, She Will Rise is a great read. I strongly recommend it. You also have a podcast, right, that you're doing? You've joined the podcasting ranks.
That's coming in the next few weeks called
great.
Naked Politics with Katie Hill.
Oh, all right. That's a good title. And any other books you're thinking about? Like, are you got any other books up in you?
Yeah, definitely gonna go for another one. Trying to kind of figure out, I have so much sort of unpack and trying to figure out what that looks like next. But yes, definitely.
Therapy helps with that for sure.
Yeah.
All right, Katie, thanks again for doing this. Thank you so much, and good luck with everything.